Effective immediately and by the final will of Mrs. Margaret Whitmore, all assets, properties, and business interests are hereby transferred to Isabella Whitmore. Silence. He divorced her. Chose his mistress. Threw her out like she was nothing. But what he didn't know was that his mother had already made her choice. And in one moment, everything he thought he owned was no longer his. His mother made sure he paid for it. Before we begin, please take a moment to like this video, share it, and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps this channel grow. Now let's begin. Ethan Whitmore was everything a woman could dream of, tall, impeccably dressed, with a charm that made the room revolve around him. In their penthouse, with walls of glass reflecting the city lights, Isabella Whitmore moved gracefully, adjusting the silver cutlery for their dinner party. Their life was picture perfect, the artful mix of wealth, elegance, and social influence. Every detail of the evening screamed opulence, from the hand-blown crystal chandelier casting fractured rainbows across the polished marble floor to the soft strains of a string quartet playing in the background. Isabella had spent the better part of the day preparing. Her hands smoothed the folds of her silk gown as she surveyed the room. Everything had to be perfect. After all, appearances mattered in their world. She glanced at Ethan across the table. His laughter was easy, fluid, a practiced charm she had once admired. But tonight, there was something off. The way he kept checking his phone, a faint crease forming between his brows whenever he read a message. She hadn't seen that look directed at her in years. He came closer, his hand brushing hers as he "Saturday, you look radiant tonight," he said, and the words sounded rehearsed. Isabella smiled politely, but noticed the way his eyes lingered on something behind her, something invisible to her own senses. The subtle tension prickled her spine. Had left. Isabella returned to their bedroom and found it, an innocuous text on his phone, a message from Lila Carter. She had seen that name in passing, mentioned at society parties, but never like this. A cold dread settled in her chest. Her hands trembled slightly as she scrolled through the messages, flirtations, plans, laughter shared at her expense. Betrayal didn't come with a warning. It arrived silently, in moments of carelessness. She looked at Ethan when he entered the room. "Who is she?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside. His eyes flickered, caught in the corner of shame and arrogance. "You don't need to worry about her," he said, brushing past her. But worry had already rooted itself in her heart. Something that had seemed so secure, so invincible, their life, was teetering on the edge. And she had no idea how far it would fall. Ethan sat across from Isabella at the breakfast table the next morning, the sunlight filtering through the tall windows, highlighting the tension in the air. There was no prelude, no small talk to soften the blow. He dove straight into it, the words sharp and clinical. "I've made a decision," he said, stirring his coffee with deliberate calm. "I want a divorce." Isabella froze, the porcelain cup slipping slightly in her hands. Her mind spun, searching for a rationale, for some explanation that would make sense of the chaos. "A divorce?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because why?" "Because I've met someone else," Ethan admitted, his tone lacking any guilt. "Her name is Lila. I want to be with her." The world seemed to constrict around her. The luxurious penthouse, the elegant furniture, the life she had built with him, it all felt fragile, like glass ready to shatter. Isabella's heart ached not for the loss of wealth, but for the betrayal of trust, the erosion of love she had poured into their years together. "What about us?" she asked, a tremor in her voice. "What about everything we've built?" Ethan shrugged. "It doesn't matter anymore. I'm happy and I want to pursue this." Her hands clenched into fists. Anger and heartbreak warred within her. But before she could respond, the doorbell rang. It was Margaret Whitmore, Ethan's mother. Her presence was a calm authority that always carried weight, a quiet power that could command rooms without a word. "Ethan," Margaret said, her voice smooth, measured. She turned to Isabella, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Are you all right, my dear?" Isabella looked into her eyes, finding a flicker of understanding. Margaret had always valued loyalty, And somehow, even now, she seemed to see the injustice before her. Ethan, meanwhile, looked uncomfortable under his mother's gaze, a reminder that not all authority lay with him. The room felt smaller, suffocating, filled with unspoken truths. Isabella realized this betrayal wasn't just between them, it would ripple outward, touching family, wealth, and social standing. Margaret Whitmore summoned Ethan to her private study later that evening. The room was lined with leather-bound books and faint traces of lavender. The air was thick with anticipation. "Ethan," she said, her tone even but sharp, "I hear you plan to bring this Lila into our lives permanently." He leaned back unconcerned. "Mother, I'm an adult. I can make my own decisions." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Your decisions are reckless, and this woman is unworthy of the Whitmore legacy." Ethan smirked. "Unworthy? She's wealthy, charming, perfect for me." "Perfect for you," Margaret repeated slowly, her voice hardening, "does not mean perfect for this family. You've chosen poorly, and there will be consequences." The words settled in the room like a storm cloud. Ethan's confidence faltered slightly. Margaret continued, her composure unshakable. "Effective immediately, I am restricting your access to family funds and investments. You will not spend one more penny of our assets recklessly." Ethan tightened. He had assumed the family fortune was his by birthright untouchable. But the cold authority in his mother's voice left no room for argument. "Mother, this is absurd," he said, trying to regain control, but Margaret's unwavering stare cut through him. She dismissed him with a wave, the weight of her decision lingering in the air. For the first time, Ethan realized Lila's allure could not shield him from the power of family loyalty and long-standing influence. Lila arrived at the mansion the following weekend, her presence bright, commanding, and entirely overwhelming. She floated through the grand halls, touching curtains, inspecting the art, and commenting on the staff with a casual arrogance. "This place is magnificent," she said to Ethan, her smile sharp and calculating. "But I think it needs a little personality." Ethan chuckled nervously, trying to mirror her energy. He had expected loyalty, devotion, perhaps admiration, but Lila's presence brought tension and subtle fear. The staff whispered behind her back, exchanging glances. Even the house itself seemed to resist her intrusion, the grandeur dimmed in her arrogance. Meanwhile, Isabella moved quietly into a temporary residence provided by Margaret's friend, Catherine. It was modest compared to her former home, but she felt an unexpected sense of liberation. Away from Ethan and Lila, she could breathe again. The city felt different, possibilities stretching before her like uncharted territory. Margaret, ever the quiet strategist, maintained contact, offering subtle advice, a lifeline to Isabella's resilience. "You will rise again," she assured her one evening. "Trust that the world still has a place for those who act with dignity." Isabella held those words close, the memory of her betrayal fueling a quiet determination. Lila's intrusion into her life had not broken her spirit, it had sharpened it. Isabella settled into Catherine's home, a safe haven filled with warmth, laughter, and the faint scent of lavender. Here, away from the shadows of betrayal, she began to rebuild her life. She took evening classes in business management, networked discreetly in social circles, and slowly cultivated her independence. Each morning, she walked through the quiet streets, imagining a future beyond Ethan's influence, a life defined by her choices, not by his whims. She called Margaret occasionally, each conversation a reminder that loyalty, kindness, and patience could wield unexpected power. Meanwhile, Ethan struggled in the mansion that no longer felt like home. Lila's charm began to fray, revealing selfishness and insecurity. Arguments became routine, her laughter, once intoxicating, now grated on his nerves. He realized too late that wealth alone could not secure happiness, and the life he had chosen was crumbling. Isabella, on the other hand, discovered her own strength. She found joy in small victories, in friendships, in moments of quiet triumph that reminded her of her worth. Her heartbreak had not destroyed her, it had propelled her into a life where she could finally breathe freely. And somewhere, in the quiet distance, Margaret watched. She knew Isabella's resilience had earned her favor in ways even Ethan could not comprehend. The seeds of future justice, quiet and unyielding, had already begun to take root. The city's spring gala was the social highlight of the year, a night when the wealthy and influential flaunted their grandeur. Lila glided through the grand ballroom, her sequined gown shimmering under the chandeliers, dragging Ethan in her wake. She smiled broadly, a practiced charm that masked her growing insecurity. The whispers followed her, some admiring, others skeptical, but she ignored the subtle judgment in the room. Isabella, by contrast, entered quietly, escorted by Catherine, her presence understated yet magnetic. She wore a tailored emerald dress, her hair pinned back elegantly, her posture unshakable. People turned to look, drawn not by flamboyance, but by confidence, poise, and the quiet command of a woman who had rebuilt herself. The contrast was palpable. Lila, for all her glittering appearance, seemed almost cartoonish beside Isabella's understated elegance. Ethan noticed it immediately, a pang of unease cutting through him as Isabella moved gracefully among the guests. Lila caught the tension in his expression and laughed lightly, but it was a forced sound, brittle and sharp. She leaned closer to him, whispering reassurances he didn't need. Meanwhile, Isabella engaged with a group of influential patrons. Her voice was soft, her laughter genuine, and the respect she commanded was tangible. People gravitated toward her, drawn by authenticity in a world obsessed with appearances. A prominent art dealer approached her, complimenting her insight into investments and philanthropy. She smiled, thanked him, and exchanged polite conversation, never overstepping, always composed. Later, in a quiet corner, Margaret observed the scene with a knowing expression. She noticed Ethan's discomfort, the flicker of doubt, and the subtle way the room responded to Isabella's quiet power. Margaret's mind worked swiftly, calculating, recognizing that the balance of influence had shifted under her nose, and Ethan had failed to see it. Lila, unaware of Margaret's approval of Isabella, pressed Ethan to mingle with their high society friends, her energy becoming increasingly demanding. But the whispers in the room, subtle yet cutting, reminded them both of their precarious standing. Ethan felt the first real pangs of vulnerability. For all the wealth he controlled, for all the charm Lila wielded, Isabella had become the center of attention, and it terrified him. It started subtly. Bank statements arrived late, investment portfolios showed unanticipated freezes, and the mansion staff began to report restrictions on expenditures. Lila stormed through the halls one morning, her heels clicking angrily on the marble floors, demanding explanations from Ethan. He fumbled, realizing that the financial grip he had always assumed was unshakable was slipping. Margaret's influence had moved quietly behind the scenes, redirecting access, freezing funds, and ensuring that Ethan's reckless spending would have consequences. The realization hit him like a wave. He was not the untouchable master of the Whitmore fortune he had believed himself to be. Every asset, every account, was tethered to his mother's will and her unseen hand. "I don't understand," Ethan said, his voice tight as he confronted Lila. "I should still have control. This doesn't make sense." Lila's confidence faltered. She had never encountered obstacles she couldn't charm or manipulate, but the subtle legal maneuvers and restrictions Margaret had put in place left her powerless. The mansion, their symbol of status, suddenly felt confining. Walls that once reflected luxury now loomed like silent judges, mocking their authority. Isabella, hearing of the restrictions indirectly, allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. She didn't celebrate Ethan's loss. She knew vindication would come quietly, through patience and strategy. Every day he struggled to maintain appearances. She grew stronger, more independent, more ready to reclaim the place she had been unjustly stripped of. Margaret observed from a distance, satisfied. Her actions were not about cruelty, but about teaching a lesson, about rewarding loyalty and punishing betrayal. Ethan's confidence was eroding, Lila's charm was cracking, and Isabella's quiet rise was almost imperceptible yet unstoppable. By the end of the week, the mansion felt strangely empty. Lila's sharp laughter had dulled, replaced by frustrated mutters. Ethan's confidence had cracked, and a new dynamic was emerging. For the first time, he realized he was not in control, and that control always comes at a cost. Isabella had grown closer to her own family and to Margaret, who took subtle pride in guiding her through the delicate intricacies of social influence and business acumen. Their meetings were quiet, private, but each conversation carried lessons in strategy, patience, and the importance of integrity. Margaret often recalled moments of Isabella's genuine care during her illnesses, the kindness that Ethan had often ignored. Those memories solidified Margaret's decision, though it remained a secret for now. Meanwhile, Ethan's relationship with Laya grew increasingly strained. Every conversation devolved into tension, every disagreement exposing the cracks in what he had thought was his perfect plan. Laya demanded more luxury, more attention, more validation, but with his finances restricted, he could no longer provide the lifestyle she had grown accustomed to. In contrast, Isabella thrived in her modest environment, building her own reputation quietly. She attended charitable events, met influential patrons, and managed small business opportunities with elegance and precision. Each success reinforced her confidence, showing her that she didn't need Ethan or Laya to define her worth. Margaret's subtle mentorship was invaluable. She didn't give Isabella power directly, she taught her to navigate it. How to speak to influential investors, how to cultivate respect without arrogance, and how to maintain dignity while others floundered. Isabella absorbed these lessons with quiet determination, her heartbreak transforming into strength. Ethan, on the other hand, was blind to this emerging balance of influence. Every attempt to assert himself at social events ended in subtle humiliation, a reminder that wealth and status alone could not secure loyalty or admiration. Lila's temper frayed, her impatience growing, and Ethan was left juggling the consequences of his choices. By the end of the chapter, the unspoken truth was clear. Family loyalty and integrity carried power that no charm, money, or manipulation could match. Isabella was no longer the vulnerable wife she had once been, she was quietly becoming a force to be reckoned with. Laya had never been patient with failure. Each slight, each whisper of disapproval, chipped away at her carefully curated image. She noticed how the city's elite subtly favored Isabella's company at social gatherings, how Ethan's unease became more apparent each day. Her frustration manifested in sharp remarks, cold glares, and increasing attempts to dominate conversations, all of which failed spectacularly. One evening, at a lavish dinner hosted by a mutual acquaintance, Lila's veneer finally cracked. Isabella arrived late, serene and composed, receiving polite nods from everyone in the room. Laya, perched beside Ethan, felt a surge of panic. For the first time, she realized charm and allure could not override respect earned through authenticity. Ethan tried to smooth tensions, whispering reassurances to Laya, but her impatience grew. Every failed attempt to assert dominance in conversation reminded her, and him, how fragile their position had become. Meanwhile, Isabella charmed quietly from across the room, offering genuine interest in others' accomplishments, listening rather than boasting, earning admiration without even trying. Lila's frustration boiled over in private, where she snapped at Ethan. "You need to fix this. No one respects me here." Ethan's patience was thinning. "I'm trying," he said, voice low. "But it's not just about us, people. They respond to her differently. I can't control that." Her face twisted in disbelief. Control had always been her way of surviving, and now it eluded her entirely. The room seemed to shrink around them, the power dynamics shifting subtly, irrevocably. For Isabella, each observation, each small victory, reinforced her belief that patience, dignity, and strategic thinking could achieve what manipulation and arrogance could not. By the end of the night, Laya was on edge, Ethan was tense, and Isabella quietly reclaimed another fragment of the world she had once lost. The battle lines were drawn, and the true power struggle had only just begun. The charity gala was meant to cement social standing, but it became the stage for Lila's unraveling. She arrived with Ethan, her gown dazzling, her confidence bordering on arrogance. As she took to the center of the ballroom, she attempted to charm the audience, speak of generosity, and draw attention to her influence. But every compliment she offered seemed forced, every gesture exaggerated. Meanwhile, Isabella moved among the guests discreetly, listening, conversing, and leaving impressions that lingered long after she left each group. Her laughter was soft, but genuine, her presence commanding admiration rather than envy. Observers whispered comparisons, noting the subtle difference between authentic charm and hollow flamboyance. During the evening's highlight, Lila attempted a grand announcement about a donation she claimed to have secured for the foundation. Her speech stumbled, details incorrect, leaving the audience murmuring in confusion. Ethan felt a flush of embarrassment he could not hide, realizing that Lila's carefully constructed image was crumbling before him. Isabella watched from a distance, calm, composed, and quietly triumphant. She had no need for theatrics. Her actions spoke louder than any words. Every subtle eye roll, every conversation, every shared smile of approval reinforced her position while highlighting Lila's failures. By the night's end, social media buzz erupted, subtly mocking Lila's missteps while praising Isabella's grace and effectiveness. Ethan's unease deepened. He had chosen the wrong side, the wrong partner, and the consequences were impossible to ignore. The gala ended not with applause, but with tension, whispers, and a clear understanding that the balance of power had shifted. Lila was exposed, Ethan humiliated, and Isabella's rise was unmistakable. The public eye had witnessed the shift, and nothing would ever be the same. Ethan Whitmore had always believed that charm, wealth, and strategic charm could bend the world to his will. But now, standing in the grand foyer of his mansion, he felt the first real pangs of vulnerability. Lila paced nervously beside him, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floors, her hands drumming on the polished railing of the staircase. She looked at him with frustration, expecting reassurance, expecting dominance, expecting that he would fix everything. But he didn't have answers. Every attempt to reassert control had failed spectacularly. Social events ended in embarrassment. Business partners subtly deflected his advances, and whispers followed him like shadows he could not shake. The mansion that once symbolized power now felt like a gilded cage, the walls reflecting his anxiety back at him. Lila's sharp demands and constant questioning of his authority only amplified the tension. "I don't understand," she hissed, frustration making her voice tremble. "Why does nobody listen to us? Why does everything feel wrong?" Ethan ran his hand through his hair, feeling the weight of reality pressing down. It's not just us," he admitted quietly. "People respond to Isabella differently. There's respect there. Something we don't have." Lila's eyes widened, disbelief flashing across her face. "How can she? She was just a wife you pushed aside. She's nothing without you." Ethan shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping him. "You don't understand. It's not about me. It's about what she has. Dignity, patience. She knows how to hold herself without needing anyone to prop her up." The truth settled over them like a storm. For the first time, Ethan realized he had underestimated Isabella entirely. Every move he had made, every betrayal, every display of arrogance had only pushed her closer to a power he had never imagined. Lila, meanwhile, was discovering the limits of her charm. Her manipulation, her social prowess, her control over Ethan, they were meaningless against a woman who commanded respect quietly, effortlessly. Margaret's silent influence had already shifted the balance. Ethan had assumed wealth would guarantee loyalty and power would guarantee control. But he was learning the hard way that the most formidable forces were invisible: patience, strategy, and moral authority. The fight was no longer just social or financial. It was a battle for relevance, and he was losing. Lila Carter had always believed she could charm her way through any obstacle. Wealth, influence, even Ethan's affection. She thought all of it was hers to command. But the cracks were widening, and she could no longer ignore them. Social gatherings grew tense. Laughter that once revolved around her now drifted elsewhere. Invitations became scarce, and subtle whispers followed her at every event. Ethan, struggling to maintain appearances, tried to soothe her panic. "It's just temporary," he said, his own voice tinged with uncertainty. "People will come around." "Temporary?" Lila snapped, her voice sharp and desperate. "Temporary isn't good enough. I can't lose this. I won't." But control had slipped through her fingers. Even the mansion seemed hostile now, its grandeur hollow, without the flow of resources she expected. Staff responded curtly to her commands, subtle hints of loyalty still lingering toward Isabella, whose quiet rise went unnoticed by few but observed by all. Meanwhile, Margaret's plan continued to unfold silently. The restrictions she had placed on Ethan were more than financial. They were a calculated strategy to expose the fragility of misplaced trust. Every failed attempt by Ethan and Lila to regain social footing reinforced Isabella's growing influence. By the end of the week, Lila's charm had deteriorated into desperation. Her arguments with Ethan became public enough to raise eyebrows among social circles. Her elegant facade, once so carefully crafted, now revealed cracks, petty frustrations, sharp words, visible panic. Social media, always hungry for scandal, began reflecting her decline subtly, praising Isabella's grace and composure in contrast. Ethan's frustration reached its peak. He realized that all the wealth in the world could not guarantee loyalty, respect, or admiration. Lila's attempts to assert dominance were failing, and the mansion that once symbolized power now reminded him of every mistake he had made. For Isabella, the events were affirming. She had never sought revenge, only survival and dignity. Each misstep by Lila, every argument, every public humiliation, served as quiet evidence that patience and integrity were more powerful than manipulation and deceit. Margaret Whitmore's passing was quiet, dignified, and meticulously arranged. Ethan and Lila arrived at the estate, assuming a ceremonial reading of her will would be a formality. The mansion was still, the air heavy with expectation. Lawyers, distant relatives, and Isabella, invited discreetly by Margaret before her death, were gathered in the grand study. The lawyer, a stern man with silver hair, cleared his throat. The envelope containing Margaret's last testament lay in front of him, a small but formidable barrier between past authority and present consequences. Margaret Whitmore's final will, he began, voice measured, bequeaths all assets, property, and business interests to Isabella Whitmore. Ethan froze. His mouth opened, closed, and opened again. What are you saying?" His voice wavered, disbelief and panic intertwining. The lawyer looked at him, unwavering. "It is as stated. This will is legally binding. Any attempt to contest it will result in immediate legal action and substantial penalties. Margaret Whitmore's wishes are clear." Lila's face went pale. The mansion, the investments, the image of invincibility she had counted on, all gone. She turned to Ethan, fury in her eyes, realizing that her world had collapsed. This can't be," she whispered, trembling. Ethan's hands gripped the edge of the table. His voice rose, desperate and pleading. It's impossible. She can't, this isn't fair." The lawyer shook his head slowly. "Fairness is irrelevant. This is the last will of Margaret Whitmore. You were given the opportunity to act with integrity. You chose otherwise." The room was silent. Isabella remained composed, calm, and dignified. She had long anticipated this moment, prepared in ways Ethan and Lila had never imagined. The revelation was not just financial, it was moral, social, and emotional. Ethan's mind raced. He had underestimated Isabella completely. Every conversation, every insult, every betrayal he had orchestrated now seemed to mock him. He turned to her, eyes desperate, voice breaking. "Isabella, please. I can fix this. Let me make it right. We can start over." She looked at him with calm certainty, her expression steady. Years of pain, humiliation, and betrayal had hardened into resilience. She had long moved on, emotionally and strategically. "Ethan," she said quietly, "there's nothing to fix. I've moved forward. I have my life, my dignity, and the family I choose to honor. You are no longer part of that equation." The words landed like a hammer, final and irrevocable. Ethan's shoulders slumped. For the first time, he realized that wealth, manipulation, and charm could not undo the consequences of his choices. Lila, standing beside him, realized that her influence was equally meaningless. She had relied on power and illusion, both of which had crumbled completely. Isabella's triumph was quiet but absolute. She was now in control of the family empire, respected, admired, and free from the shadows of betrayal. Every step she had taken, every lesson she had learned, every quiet act of resilience had led to this moment. The mansion, now under Isabella's direction, felt alive once more, not as a symbol of control, but as a monument to integrity, patience, and intelligence. Lila had left, disgraced, her ambitions shattered. Ethan lingered briefly, a shadow of his former arrogance, powerless to reclaim what he had lost. Margaret's plan, executed silently before her death, had ensured that loyalty, care, and dignity were rewarded. Isabella managed the family business with precision, respect, and grace, consolidating her authority while maintaining the warmth that had always defined her character. Even the city's elite, once focused on gossip and appearances, recognized the shift. Isabella had not sought revenge. She had simply claimed what was rightfully hers through perseverance and integrity. Ethan and Lila were left to face the consequences of arrogance, betrayal, and short-sighted ambition. As Isabella walked through the halls of the mansion, the sunlight catching the crystal chandeliers, she paused to look at a portrait of Margaret. A soft smile touched her lips. She had inherited more than wealth. She had inherited wisdom, strength, and a legacy of values that could not be bought or stolen. The final chapter of her story was not about revenge, but triumph. Isabella Whitmore had survived betrayal, reclaimed her place, and emerged as a woman whose power lay in dignity, intelligence, and unwavering integrity. The world had watched, and the lesson was clear. True strength is measured not in wealth or charm, but in patience, loyalty, and the courage to rise above injustice. If you enjoyed this story, don't just watch and leave. Like this video, share it with friends and family. And most importantly, subscribe to this channel for more powerful and interesting stories. Bye. See you in the next one.